I'm so happy to be back with you today. Today we're going to hear the story Make Way for Ducklings by Robert McCloskey. And this is an awesome story that people have enjoyed hearing for a while. It is about a mom and dad duck finding the perfect place to raise their little ducklings and some of the adventures that they go on where they find their home. I hope you enjoy the story. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were looking for the perfect place to live, but every time Mr. Mallard saw what looked like a nice place, Mrs. Mallard said it was no good. There were sure to be foxes in the woods or turtles in the water, and she was not going to raise a family where there might be foxes or turtles, so they flew on and on. When they got to Boston, they felt too tired to fly any further. There was a nice pond in the public garden with a little island on it. The very place to spend the night, quacked Mr. Mallard, so down they flapped. Next morning, they fished for their breakfast in the mud at the bottom of the pond, but they didn't find much. Just as they were getting ready to start on their way, a strange, enormous bird came by. It was pushing a boat full of people, and there was a man sitting on its back. "Good morning," quacked Mr. Mallard, being polite. The big bird was too proud to answer. But the people on the boat threw peanuts into the water, so the Mallards followed them all around the pond and got another breakfast, better than the first. Why do you think that that big bird didn't answer? It's not real. It's part of a swan boat. "I like this place," said Mrs. Mallard, as they climbed out on the bank and waddled along. "Why don't we build a nest and raise our ducklings right in this pond? There are no foxes and no turtles, and the people feed us peanuts. What could be better?" "Good," said Mr. Mallard, delighted that at last Mrs. Mallard had found a place that suited her. But, "Look out!" squawked Mrs. Mallard all of a dither. "You'll get run over." And when she got her breath, and she added, "This is no place for babies. With all those horrid things rushing about, we'll have to look somewhere else." "What is that horrid thing?" "A bicycle." It's going too fast though for Mrs. Mallard. So they flew over Beacon Hill and round the State House, where there was no place there. These are buildings in the city of Boston. Not the right place. Let's see. They looked in Louisburg Square, but there was no water to swim in. Then they flew over the Charles River. "This is better," quacked Mr. Mallard. "That island looks like a nice quiet place, and it's only a little way from the public garden." "Yes," said Mrs. Mallard, remembering the peanuts. "That looks like just the right place to hatch ducklings." So they chose a cozy spot among the bushes near the water and settled down to build their nest, and only just in time, for now they were beginning to molt. Molting means lose their wings. I apologize, lose their feathers. All their old wing feathers started to drop out, and they would not be able to fly again until the new ones grew in. But of course they could swim, and one day they swam over to the park on the riverbank, and there they met a policeman named Michael. Michael fed them peanuts, and after that the Mallards called on Michael every day. After Mrs. Mallard had laid 8 eggs in the nest, she couldn't go to visit Michael anymore because she had to sit on the eggs to keep them warm. All birds sit on their eggs to keep them warm. She moved off the nest only to get a drink of water or to have her lunch or to count the eggs and make sure they were all there. One day the ducklings hatched out. First came Jack, then Cack, and then Lack, then Mack, and Knack, and Whack, and Pack, and Quack. Whew. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were bursting with pride. It was a great responsibility taking care of so many ducklings, and it kept them very busy. One day, Mr. Mallard decided he'd like to take a trip to see what the rest of the river was like, further on. So off he set. "I'll meet you in a week in the public garden," he quacked over his shoulder. "Take good care of the ducklings." "Don't worry," said Mrs. Mallard. "I know all about bringing up children." And she did. She taught them how to swim and dive. She taught them to walk in a line, to come when they were called, and to keep a safe distance from bikes and scooters and other things with wheels. Our families teach us to be safe in the road too. When at last she felt perfectly satisfied with them, she said one morning, "Come along, children, follow me." Before you could wink an eyelash, Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack fell into line just as they had been taught. Mrs. Mallard led the way into the water, and they swam behind her to the opposite bank. The bank is the edge of the river, so they're just swimming from one side of the river over to the other. There they waded ashore and waddled along till they came to the highway. Oh boy, does the highway sound like a good place for ducks? I don't know. Let's see how it goes. Mrs. Mallard stepped out to cross the road. Honk, honk went the horns on the speeding cars. Quack went Mrs. Mallard as she tumbled back again. Quack, 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 quack went Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack, just as loud as their little quackers could quack. The cars kept speeding by and honking, and Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings kept right on quack, quack, quacking. Oh boy. I wonder how they'll be able to cross the street. They made such a noise that Michael came running, waving his arms and blowing his whistle. He planted himself in the center of the road, raised one hand to stop the traffic, and then beckoned with the other, the way policemen do, for Mrs. Mallard to cross over. As soon as Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings were safe on the other side and on their way down Mount Vernon Street, Michael rushed back to his police booth. He called Chansey at headquarters and said, "There's a family of ducks walking down the street." Clancy said, "Family of what?" "Ducks," yelled Michael. "Send a police car, quick." Meanwhile, Mrs. Mallard had reached the corner bookshop and turned into Charles Street with Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack, all marching in line behind her. Look at that. They're just going right down the road. Everyone stared. An old lady from Beacon Hill said, "Isn't it amazing?" And the man who swept the streets said, "Well, now, ain't that nice?" And when Mrs. Mallard heard them, she was so proud she tipped her nose in the air and walked along with an extra swing in her waddle. When they came to the corner of Beacon Street, there was the police car with 4 policemen that Clancy had sent from headquarters. The policemen held back the traffic so Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings could march across the street. Right on into the public garden. And there it is. Inside the gate, they all turned round to say thank you to the policeman. The policeman smiled and waved goodbye. When they reached the pond and swam across to the little island, there was Mr. Mallard waiting for them, just as he had promised. Here he is, right here. The ducklings liked the new island so much that they decided to live there. All day long they follow the swan boats and eat peanuts. And when night falls, they swim to their little island and go to sleep. The end. So, Make Way for Ducklings is a sweet story. In the story, we hear some of the ways that Mrs. Mallard teaches her ducklings to be safe. So think about some of those ways. What does she have to teach them for them to be ready to go over to the public gardens? And I also want you to think about some of the things that your family teaches you so that you can be safe when you go outside too. This story takes place in Boston. Boston is the capital of Massachusetts, where I came from. And the public gardens is a real place. It's a beautiful green area. It's a park where people can go ride their bikes like we see in the story, or walk around, walk their dogs, and just get some fresh air in the middle of the city where there's lots of big buildings and not lots of grass usually. In the public gardens, there's a statue of Mrs. Mallard and all of her little ducklings. It's not the same size as a real duck and her ducklings would be. It's much bigger. Mrs. Mallard is actually big enough for you to sit on, and then her ducklings are a little bit smaller than that. So people love to go see the statue and love to sit on Mrs. Mallard and take a picture. And then the swan boats really do go around there too. So if you ask a grown-up at home to help you out, you can search in Google for the public gardens, and you can look at Make Way for Ducklings in Boston and see some pictures of that sculpture that's there. It's pretty cool to see. And you can learn some more about what's in Boston and where this story took place. I hope you enjoyed our story, Make Way for Ducklings, today. I'll see you soon.